What we have here is a failure to communicate. Name that movie. Okay, seriously, what we have here is a 2007 Les Paul Custom Classic Custom, a Les Paul Classic Custom. And I think it was one of the guitars of the week, which is a series Gibson did. But before I get too much into this guitar, I want to talk about its predecessor, the Gibson Les Paul Classic, which if you don't know about, it's kind of an interesting little find. In the 90s, there used to be a great guitar store called Vintage Guitar down in Sunset Boulevard, run by a guy named John Nelson. And John knew everything about what kind of Tolec should be on this Fender amp, what kind of screw would be in this guitar. He knew so much. He's a great guitar player. He played with Eddie Money back in the day. So Google that if you've never heard of Eddie Money. I remember him telling me in the mid-90s that the best Les Paul that had come out in a long time, and that was the most affordable even then, was called the Les Paul Classic. So basically the story goes, if I'm not wrong, you know, through the 70s and 80s, we all know Gibson was kind of doing some experimental things, some different things. They were trying to improve on what was already a great thing, and maybe for a more cost-effective, for a little higher profit margin, maybe. But we all know that through the 70s and 80s, Gibson had lots of weird things going on. They had like large headstocks, they had the weird headstock angle, they had goofy fonts that were not really well done. Sometimes there was like really kind of fuzzy, and the guitars were super heavy. They pieced together guitars with weight not being consideration at all, and sometimes it was just like 5 or 6 pieces of wood glued together, super heavy. The pickups were overwound. There was too much chrome. There were short neck tenons. The binding was all wrong. They had volutes. So anyway, in the late 80s, they finally got it together. They really just kind of went back to basics, and in 1990 they introduced a series called the Les Paul Classic. Now, the cool thing about the Classics were they got the headstock shape right, they had the neck angle correct, they had everything looking right. They even tinted some of the inlay to make it look aged. They had the binding looking correct. So aesthetically, it looked just like the Gibsons of yore, the Gibsons in the glory days. The early Classics are kind of cool. Now they had their shortcomings too. They advertised having a 60s neck, which was maybe a faster neck, so they thought. I've played some real 60s Les Pauls, and the Classics weren't exactly the same shape. The real ones had a little more girth on the shoulders, but they were smaller and they were faster necks. They had a short neck tenon. We'll talk a little bit about that later. They had overwound pickups. And the two things that aesthetically made the Classic interesting is that on the truss rod cover it said Classic in big cursive letters, and on the pick guard it said 1960 to represent the year that the guitar is kind of made after. Now, what players realized really quickly is you could just replace that truss rod cover with a traditional one and replace the pick guard, and you pretty much had the same Les Paul that Gibson was charging a lot more for at the time. So 1990, 91, 92, I think part of 93, you can still find these guitars that say Les Paul model and just replace the truss rod and the pick guard, and you got a great little guitar. Well, then in 1993, Gibson caught on to all this, and they started putting the word Classic in the headstock. So you couldn't fool anybody into thinking that it was an actual vintage guitar anymore. It had a short neck tenon, and what I mean by that, Gibson guitars are made more like furniture than some other assembly line guitars are, in that the neck is actually glued into like a tongue and groove into a slot, and underneath the pickup you can see the kind of the tongue, what they call the tenon of the neck that goes through the body where it's glued in. And in the original 50s and 60s Les Pauls, you could see the tenon that go almost to the other side of the humbucker in the neck position. Then in the late 60s they made some a little bit shorter, then they made some that were just stopped at the end of the fingerboard. Now, I don't know why they did this. Maybe the advent of better glues. Maybe it was cost effective that over thousands of guitars you actually save that much in material. Who knows? And does it affect the tone? You know, I would be lying if I said it didn't, because it does. From my general impression, guitars with a long neck tenon have a deeper, throatier sound. Now, when you're cranked up with a band live on stage with a couple shots of tequila in you and your lights flashing and you're a rock star, I don't know how much that really matters. You know, it's more of a collector's and a valuable thing. It's not better or worse, it's just different as far as tone goes. The Classics also had overwound pickups, so a lot of guys would just replace the pickup, which leads me to this guitar, which I discovered this on Craigslist, and I just liked it because it looked cool. The headstock with the aged multi-binding caught my eye, plus the little crown Gibson logo in the middle. I'd never seen it on a Les Paul before. Plus, it looked like a custom, but it had trapezoidal inlays. In 2007, Gibson did a run of guitars called the Guitars of the Week, which once a week they'd put out a different guitar, and there were some really goofy ones. They were just experimenting and throwing things out there. I don't know if they were leftover parts or if it was like happy hour at the end of every week and they were just coming up with like goofy ideas for guitars and finishes and weird combinations of stuff. But some of them were quite nice and some of them stuck. And the more I've gone down that rabbit hole on the internet, I think that this guitar actually continued on for a couple years afterwards. The other guitars they only made like 400 of, and that was it for those week. For about 40 weeks, I think, of the year of 2007. They had weird combinations of like SG bodies, flying V's with weird tailpieces and strange colors and weird mixes of appointments of past Gibsons. This is a 2007, which is weird because I couldn't really find this particular model exactly in the Guitars of the Week. The one I found had P90s, but then I heard that they made a few of them with humbuckers. So I'm thinking this might be one of those ones because the serial number does say 2007. This one has an ebony fretboard, which is beautiful aesthetically, and also it responds really nice, I feel. It's got the beautiful aged binding and the headstock, which is cool. It's got the jet black ebony look, which is awesome. It does have the short neck tenon. I think it came with some 57, the Gibson reissued humbucker pickups, but I put some really great throwback humbuckers in here. These are the SC101s that John knows I like, and if you have never tried throwback pickups, you should try them. They're totally beefy, but still clear as a bell. I love what they do there at Throwback. If I'm not mistaken, the pots were sometimes weird values too. I think you might want to swap those out and put 500K pots in there. I think sometimes to compensate for the overwound pickups and stuff, they used weird value pots, which make a difference in the tone too. I added regular ABR. It came with a, I think they came with like a natural bridge, style bridge, but I think just for vintage look. And I put the top hat knobs. It came with speed knobs, which I think these look a little bit slicker. No binding in the back, so it has a more of a Les Paul thing. I don't know if it's chambered. It didn't really say in the descriptions I could find online, but Gibson was doing a lot of that at the time, so it might be. I wouldn't really know if it sounds better or worse with or without the holes in it, of course, now. And I'm not sure it has them unless I were to go through an x-ray next time I'm in LAX with this guitar. But these are cool guitars. They look the part, and you can set them up to play really great. Just swap out the electronics for better stuff.